looking for an apple pie with a buttery, flaky crust and delicious filling? I've tested so many variations looking for that perfect slice, and I'm happy to say that this recipe is the clear winner. I'm going to share all of my success tips with you, so grab your rolling pin and let's get started. In culinary school, I learned how to make pâte brisée. It's a very classic pie dough recipe that's extremely versatile. You can use it to make a sturdy, flaky crust, but how you incorporate the ingredients is really crucial. We're going to start by taking chilled butter. I have 1 3/4 cups or 28 tablespoons. Going to cut the butter into 1/2-inch cubes. The size of the butter is really important because it's going to determine how flaky the crust is going to be. You're going to want to work pretty quickly so that the fat doesn't melt, but I always chill the butter before I add it to the flour. All right, let's get it chilled. I'm going to use a stand mixer to make the pie dough. We're going to add 3 cups of all-purpose flour to the bowl and a 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. Just going to turn it on to the lowest setting on stir just to incorporate everything together for about 10 seconds. Now I'm going to add the chilled butter. Just add the little pieces right in. We're going to stir the butter and the flour together just to start to coat those butter pieces. Just pulse it so it doesn't make a huge mess. Now I'm going to keep it on the low setting for about 60 seconds to 75 seconds, and this is going to start to break that butter pieces into the flour. The butter is going to coat the flour so that you have a nice and tender crust. So what we're looking for is for a coarse texture and the butter to be broken down into these pea-sized pieces. That's going to give us that flaky crust. And if there's some really large pieces still left, I just break them apart. They're usually floating on the bottom of the bowl. Now I'm going to add ice cold water, and I made sure to keep the water chilled in the refrigerator because we want to add the water that's cold so that the butter stays cold too. I start with 3/4 cup of water, but we're not going to add the whole thing. We're just going to start by adding 1 tablespoon of chilled water at a time. This is going to allow the starches and the proteins in the flour to hydrate. And then just stir for 1 to 2 seconds. I usually use about 8 to 10 tablespoons depending on how humid it is in the kitchen. So it will vary, sometimes batch to batch. I'm on 8 right now. And as you can see, everything is kind of clumped together. And when you grab it with your hand, if it can press and not be dry and fall apart, then it's ready. And you don't want to over mix, otherwise the dough is gonna get really tough. This recipe makes a 2-pound dough, which is gonna give you the top and bottom crust. I like to weigh out my dough into 1-pound portions. Just put it on my digital scale. And if you don't have a scale, that's okay, you can eyeball it. Take your crust and form the dough into a disc. And the more circular you have it, the easier it will be to roll out. And then press it down into 1-inch thickness. Okay, just wrap it up. And we'll repeat with the remaining dough. Okay, the great thing about this recipe is that you can make it in advance. I really like doing this because if you let it sit overnight, it's going to give the gluten a chance to relax. When you're moving and bringing everything together, it's kind of like the proteins are working out and their muscles are tightening up. And if you try to roll it out, say an hour or 2 after you do that process, the dough is going to taste really tough. So give it at least 4 hours if you're going to make it all in one day, or just Put these in a resealable plastic bag in the refrigerator for up to 2 days. I've taken the pie dough out of the refrigerator and let it come to room temperature for about 5 to 10 minutes. It's gonna make it a lot easier to roll. And if it still doesn't feel pliable, just let it sit for a little bit longer. The first thing you want to do is dust your cutting board or your surface with some flour. Add some flour on top. And then we're going to roll the top crust into a 12 to 13 inch circle. You want the thickness to be about 1/4 inch thick. This is gonna make it a lot easier to slice the pieces and it won't fall apart, because that fruit filling can get pretty heavy. If you see the edges of the pie crust cracking, no big deal, just press them back together. You can see the pieces of flattened butter when you roll out the dough, and that's gonna create those layers of flaky, buttery crust. Almost getting there. Now I'm just going to roll it up onto my rolling pin like this, and then just grab your 9-inch pie dish. Ease the crust into the pie dish and then press it into the sides so it's nice and flush. Now you can use a paring knife, or I like to use kitchen shears also, and just trim the edge of the crust right against the edge of the pie plate. If you're making a lattice crust, I recommend that you keep about a 1/2 inch overhang so that you could fold it over later. And I'll put in the recipe notes how to make that lattice crust. If you like to create some extra decorations for your pie, just keep the edges of the crust, cut out all the decorations you'd like, and add them on top later. Okay, this looks good. Okay. Set this aside. And then for the top crust, I like to roll it out to 12 inches because I like it a little bit thicker. I mean, that's the beauty of a double crust pie, right? You want to get as much of that flaky crust as possible on your plate. Okay, now I'm going to transfer this to a baking sheet with parchment paper. And we're going to let the bottom and top crust chill in the refrigerator while we make the apple filling. This is going to let the butter firm up so it's really easy to assemble right before we bake. For the apple filling, I'm going to use 2 types of apples. Granny Smith green for its nice tart flavor and soft texture when it cooks down, and honeycrisp. Honeycrisp are a little bit sweeter and have a little bit more bite and juiciness. So we're just going to peel the apples, and I like to use a wide peeler. It just makes it a lot easier to remove the skin. And then cut down the center. And I actually like to use my 1/2 teaspoon measuring spoon to remove the seeds and the core. Just find it to be like that perfect shape. Cut off the stems. And then slice them into 1/2 inch thick slices. And I use 1.5 pounds of Granny Smith and 1.5 pounds of the honeycrisp. I just found that that equal ratio just gives that best balance. If you don't have honeycrisp available at your market, you could also use Fuji apples or Macintosh. Something that's just a little bit sweeter but doesn't get mushy when it's cooked. Now we're going to make the filling to spice up those apples and make it even more delicious. Whisk together 5 tablespoons of flour, a 1/4 cup granulated sugar, a 1/4 cup brown sugar, 1 teaspoon cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon nutmeg, a 1/4 teaspoon cloves, an 1/8 teaspoon kosher salt, and a 1/4 teaspoon lemon zest. I'm just going to whisk this all together until it's one homogeneous mixture. And if you need to, just break up the brown sugar. They get a little bit sticky and picks up moisture. I love using a combination of granulated sugar and brown sugar because the molasses and the brown sugar is going to create those wonderful caramel-like flavors. It's amazing. Take our apples and we're just going to sprinkle that flour and sugar mixture over the top. and then just toss to coat. You're going to want to let this sit for 2 minutes before you add it to the pie. The sugars are going to draw out that moisture or juice from the cut apples through osmosis, and drawing out the juices is going to help create a little bit more liquid for thickening that filling. And as the apples cook in that hot oven, all the starches in the flour are going to start to swell and thicken and glaze those apples. And then add in a ½ teaspoon of vanilla extract. Place the oven rack in the center position. Preheat to 375 degrees. Now let's assemble the pie. Today I want you to become apple pie architects, and instead of just dumping the slices into the pie, we're going to layer them nicely together. This ensures that when you slice through that pie, you're going to have consistent pieces throughout that are stacked together, and they're not going to fall and have, little gaps in between. We want nice pieces of apple in every bite. Now we're just going to dot it with 1½ teaspoons of softened butter. This just helps prevent the crust from sticking. And can't go wrong with a little bit more butter. Now it's time to add the top crust on. So it should still be nice and cool, but a little bit pliable. Just lay it on top like this. And just press the top of the crust down onto the apples. Now you want to trim about a ½ inch to 3/4 inch of that excess dough. And the overhang should be measured from the edge of the plate. Now you're going to tuck that overhang underneath this crust right here. So you securely lock in those edges and just press down. To add a little bit of decoration to the edges of the crust, I've used a fork, just the tines of a fork and going around, but then you could also kind of do the crimping. So you just use your finger, your thumb. I like to do one last little check around, make sure my design is on point and looks good. The last thing that we have to do for the pie crust is we're going to add a little bit of a vent. You could, add a few slits using a paring knife, but I like to take about a 3/4 to 1 inch little round cutter and just get right in the center and then cut a little hole. This vent is going to allow the steam from the apples exit the pie so that it doesn't get all soggy and that the flavors concentrate down inside the filling. To make the pie even more tasty, I like to add a cinnamon sugar topping. I'm just going to take 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar and a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. And just whisk that together. Now we're going to egg wash the pie. This is just 1 large egg that I whisked. The egg is going to add this beautiful golden color to the pie. So just lightly brush that on top. And make sure that you get the edges of the crust too. Now it's time to sprinkle on the cinnamon and sugar. And I like how the sugar adds just a little bit of contrast of crunch on top too. It's really nice. We're going to bake the pie at 375 degrees for about 60 to 70 minutes until the crust is golden brown and the sides are golden brown too. Wow, this looks and smells amazing. I wish you were here. Even though I want to dig into this pie right now, we need to let it cool down to room temperature, and I'm going to transfer it to a wire rack. And what it does is it lets that apple filling set up and lets that butter and the crust firm up too so that you get nice slices. It's been about 3 hours and I can't wait any longer. Let's slice this up. Ooh, it sounds really good. It's got a nice crispy crust. I could see little flakes come off, which is a good sign. Okay, let's check it out. Wow, this slice is gorgeous. You could see the caramelized coated fruit and the nice layers of apple. If you want, you could just eat it as is, or add some whipped cream, but I like it a la mode with a big scoop of vanilla ice cream on top. For another fruit-inspired recipe, make sure to check out this video right here. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed learning the science behind apple pie, please give it a big thumbs up. It means a lot when you do. See you in the next video. That is so good.